guys, it's Kira and welcome to another reading vlog. I feel like I say this at the beginning of pretty much every reading vlog I film, but that's not going to stop me from saying it again now because it is always true, and that is that I am so excited about today's vlog. In particular, I'm so excited about today's one because I'm going to be rereading a favourite book which I absolutely love and I'm kind of obsessed with. And I'm just so excited because A, I already know I love the book, and B, I just love rereads, and it's something that I don't do nearly often enough at the moment. As a child, I used to reread books all the time because I'd mostly just get new books at birthdays and Christmases, because obviously when you're a child you're not paying for your own books, and so you can't just afford to be dropping hundreds of pounds on Amazon like you can when you're an adult and you can make your own decisions about money. And so I wouldn't get new books quite as often, and so I'd spend a lot of my time just rereading and rereading old favourites, and I never got bored of them because I just think there's something lovely about returning to books that you already know you love. But then particularly since being on BookTube and being exposed to so many incredible book recommendations, I feel like I've just made less and less time for rereading because my TBR is so big and it just doesn't always seem very productive to pick up old favourites. And although I do love reading loads and loads of new books and being exposed to new authors and new stories, which is of course incredible, I do still think I want to try and squeeze in a little bit more time for rereads every once in a while, just because it is so lovely to go back to those books that you really do love and you know that you're going to have a great time reading. And today is a very gloomy and rainy Sunday, and I just feel like something about the cold, gloomy weather outside just makes me really want to get back into a book which I already know I love, because there's just something so cozy and welcoming about heading back into a fictional world which you just know you are obsessed with and that you absolutely adore. And so that is exactly what I'm going to be doing today. And the other reason, the main reason, which I'm so excited about today's reading vlog, is because I'm going to be rereading a book alongside one of my incredible friends, Carolyn from Carolyn Rereading. And the book we're going to be reading together, if you can't already tell from the title, is Normal People by Sally Rooney. This is a reread that Carolyn and I have been wanting to do for a couple of months now. I believe Carolyn first read this book around this time last year, and then I read it for the first time in January of this year, and we both loved the book when we first read it. But the reason we kind of sparked this idea of doing a buddy reread was because we both, like the rest of the world to be perfectly honest, watched the new TV adaptation of Normal People when it came out at the end of April, and we were absolutely obsessed. If you haven't already watched that TV adaptation, I would highly recommend doing so because it was incredible. Honestly, was one of the best things I've ever watched, and without a doubt was definitely up there with one of the best booked TV adaptations ever. It was just so incredible. And because we both enjoyed watching that so much, we both definitely had the desire to pick up the book again and head back into the pages of this incredible story. And so that is exactly what we're going to be doing today. And we also decided to add a little bit of an extra challenge in there by doing this one as a 24-hour readathon. Normal People is a relatively short book. It's only about 250 pages long, so compared to some other 24-hour readathons that I've done where I've tried to read a full series in one day, this readathon is going to feel a lot more relaxed and calm than some of the other reading challenges I've done. And although I do love those reading challenges and trying to see how much I can possibly read in one day, I do think given that the weather is so gloomy and grey and rainy outside and it's so cozy inside, it's just going to be nice to take my time and just enjoy rereading this book without any real time pressure. Alongside reading the book and just taking my time and seeing which new details I notice, because that is one of my favourite things about rereads, is just seeing which bits of the book jump out at you each time you delve into the pages. I'm also going to be rewatching some of the episodes of the show, which I just mentioned I am obsessed with. I watched them all when it first came out in April, but I haven't rewatched any of them since then, although I've definitely wanted to. I was holding off because Carolyn and I decided to do this reread, and so I thought it would be nice to watch some episodes along with my reading. And then finally, once I finished this book, seeing as I love Sally Rooney so much, I also thought I might try and squeeze in a reread of Conversations with Friends, her other book. Particularly because, like I said, I read Normal People back in January, and then I ended up reading Conversations with Friends in March, and so this was quite a recent read for me. However, when I was comparing this one to my read of Normal People when I read this one in March, I remember thinking that Normal People was amazing and they were both 5-star reads, but I actually did prefer Conversations with Friends. But now that I've watched the Normal People TV adaptation and become even more obsessed with the world of Marianne and Connell and just everything that Normal People is about, about. I'm really intrigued to reread both of these books and see which one I like the most, because I feel like watching the TV show has slightly changed my perception of Normal People, and I feel like potentially this one might edge out ahead. But then at the same time, I loved Conversations with Friends so much, and to be perfectly honest, they were both 5-star reads, so whichever one I like better isn't really that far ahead of the other one because they're both so incredible. But essentially, that is what my next 24 hours is going to be looking like, and I'm pretty excited about it. If you're not familiar with Conversations with Friends and Normal People, I will of course give a little bit more detail about the plots as I'm reading them, but Normal People, which is the one that I'm going to be starting with, focuses on two people, Marianne and Connell, who are at the same high school together. They're 18 years old at the start of the book, and they are from very different social circles and don't really interact in school. But outside of school, they kind of spark a little bit of a thing with each other, and that's where the story kind of kicks off from, and we follow them over, I believe, a 4-year period as they keep continually coming in and out of each other's lives, and they're kind of like magnets to each other, and no matter what happens, they always seem to be attracted back into one another's circles. And so it's a really incredible book, which I believe shows a very nuanced view of the ups and downs of relationships, and shows how relationships and romances are very rarely linear, which is of course what a lot of books and TV shows seem to show them as, and this book kind of challenges that. So I think it's absolutely incredible and I love it. So I'm really looking forward to getting back into this one. I am gonna make myself a hot chocolate, head upstairs where I've got some candles burning. I've got some of my favourite autumnal candles going in the bedroom and they smell so good, and then I'm going to start reading. So I will check the time once I start reading so I can make sure that I'm doing an official 24-hour readathon, and I'll catch up with you once I've got some thoughts on the books.
Hey darling, can I tell you what's been on my mind? Sick and tired of the 9 to 5 in the city life. Hey darling, we could get out of town, see the beautiful world around, wanna see it now. Pack our bags and get in that car, leave a little note and we'll drive real far. Let's get out, we can leave this city, let's drive to the open air. Yeah, the countryside is so pretty, with the wind blowing in your hair. We can look back someday, baby, don't you understand that we only get one life? I wanna make it count, honey, come on now and take my hand. Hey darling, I love it when it's me and you on the road with a couple of tunes in a car for two. Hey darling, you know we're gonna have a really good time, driving in the middle of the night when the stars are bright. Pack our bags and get in that car, leave a little note and we'll drive real far. Let's get out, we can leave this city, let's drive to the open air. Yeah, the countryside is so pretty, with the wind blowing in your hair. We can look back someday, baby, don't you understand that we only get one life? I wanna make it count, honey, come on now and take my hand.
So it's only been maybe like just under an hour and I'm about 30 pages into Normal People, and already I'm spotting things and noticing different quotes that seem to have more meaning now, and I feel like that's why rereading is so amazing, because obviously you can have an incredible time reading a book the first time, but when you understand the context of where these initial chapters are going, I feel like certain quotes just like jump out as being more significant and having more depth than you maybe would have noticed on your first time around. And so first of all, I never even really noticed, but the book starts with a quote from George Eliot, which says, It is one of the secrets in that change of mental poise which has fitly been named conversation, that to many among us neither heaven nor earth has any revelation, till some personality touches theirs with a peculiar influence, subduing them into receptiveness. And honestly, I feel like that is what this book / TV show did for me. I feel like it was just like, basically what it's touching on is how Marianne and Connell are these two people who, for no apparent reason, just kind of connect, and I feel like that's how I feel about this book. It's just one of those books where you don't really have a good explanation for why exactly you love it as much as you do, but it just is that kind of book for you. And yeah, so I really didn't pay much attention to that quote the first time around because it's not really actually relevant to the rest of the story in terms of it's not part of the main text, but I noticed it this time around and I definitely enjoyed it. The next thing I noticed was that we've got a quote from the very beginning. It's page 7 of the book, which is referring to how Connell feels about being with Marianne, and it says, being alone with her is like opening a door away from normal life and then closing it behind him. I think it's really interesting in how I feel like they're kind of the reverse of one another. Connell is someone who has a thriving social life and is really popular in school, has loads of friends, and has to think about people's opinions of him. Whereas Marianne is someone who is very much on the sidelines in terms of her social life. She doesn't really have any friends, and so whilst for Connell, interacting with Marianne is kind of an escape from that, for Marianne, her interactions with Connell are almost like an entry into what Connell views as normal life, and he's kind of like her bridge from just being completely on her own into the rest of the world. And it's really interesting how for both of them they do kind of see each other as kind of like an escape, but for Connell it's more an opportunity to get away from what he views as normal life, whereas Marianne kind of sees him as like her connection with everyone else, and he's the only person that really speaks to her. And then the final thing, which I did know was going to come up because it's one of the quotes that I sort of remember most from the TV show, and that is that Connell is kind of debating whether or not to continue on with his plans to go to Galway and study law, or to do what Marianne thinks he should do and apply to Trinity College and study English. And he's like, you'd probably just pretend that you never even knew me if you saw me in Dublin, because she's going there as well. And then she says, I'd never pretend not to know you, Connell. And I remember being so struck by that when I heard it in the TV show, because again, it was a line that I'd not necessarily paid much attention to and hadn't really stuck in my head from my first reread, but actually again it just kind of shows the divide between them in their relationship. And whilst they are kind of equals intellectually, Connell definitely comes into the relationship from a position of power, and his ability to stay in a connective relationship with Marianne but also pretend that he doesn't know her in social settings in order to protect his own popularity, whereas Marianne would never do that to him, just kind of is very indicative of the power play in the relationship that we definitely see being explored throughout the rest of the book. So if you couldn't tell already, I'm really enjoying this reread so far, and I'm going to get straight back into it. Well, they say time flies when you're reading a good book, and clearly that has been the case for me today, because somehow I started reading about 2:30 and it's now already nearly 9 p.m. I've pretty much just been reading Normal People for most of that time. I took a little break to do some yoga earlier, I also ate dinner and had a shower and all of that fun stuff, but aside from that I've pretty much just been reading. Whilst I was eating dinner though, I did start the first episode of Normal People and rewatched that one, just because I'm such a messy person that I didn't want to risk getting food on the book. So so I thought it would just be safer to put the book down for a little bit and watch the TV show instead, and it was really nice to go back into that first episode. I do think that this book being quite short, I was impressed by how many episodes they managed to make for the TV show, and even just watching that first episode, it's really clear that they really do take their time with exploring the story, and I feel like it makes a lot of sense to me because in the book, although it's very short, you do get a lot of insight into what Marianne and Connell are thinking because it's obviously written down right in front of you on the page, whereas you kind of lose that when you go into the TV show format. And so I think the producers and directors took a lot more time to show emotions and feelings and thoughts in obviously a much more visual way, which maybe needs to be conveyed like in a slightly slower way, and so they managed to really drag out the episodes, but not in a way that feels like they've really strained it out. It feels completely natural, but just that first episode literally probably only took, I'm trying to think, like first episode was probably only to about page 25 maybe, if that. And so when you think about like they made about 12 episodes of it, they really did just focus on such small passages of the book and really explored them in like incredible visual detail, and so I really enjoyed that. And it is definitely interesting to see how it's different in its visual and written format, and yet both just feel so incredible. But like I said earlier on, I'm obviously reading this book as a buddy read with Carolyn, and we had originally first talked about doing this buddy read back when the TV show first came out around the end of April, but we kind of just needed to wait until our reading plans aligned and we didn't have anything else going on so that we could dedicate a full day to reading this book. And I'm actually really glad that we didn't end up reading it earlier, because Carolyn has a friend through Instagram called Emma. She doesn't have a booktube channel, but she does have a bookstagram called Emma Read What, and I'll have her linked down below along with Carolyn as well. And Emma actually decided to join us for this buddy read, and it's actually her first time reading this book, which is super exciting because for Carolyn and I it is a reread, but Emma's going into it for the first time, and it's just going to be really exciting to see what she thinks of it. And then because we're all reading it today together, we decided to do a little Skype call where we all read for about an hour together and then just chatted about our thoughts. And Emma read about 80 pages, I think, and she was really loving it, which was incredible. And then for both Carolyn and I, we're just noticing so many passages, just like little small things, just seem even more significant the second time around when you're more familiar with the characters, and we're all just having an incredible time. One passage that Carolyn in particular noticed, because she is a huge fan of classics, is that Connell had just started university where he's studying English literature, and he is reading Emma by Jane Austen at this point in the book, and he has a conversation essentially where he has read a bit above the book, which is like right at the end, surrounding Mr. Knightley and what's going to happen with him, and he is just so moved by what's going on and so agitated by the book not going in the way that he expects that he actually has to put it down and come back to it later because he's just so taken by what's going on. And Carolyn is such a fan of classics, like I just said, and she just felt such a like connection with what Connell was saying. And I have to say, although I didn't necessarily notice it as much as Carolyn did, it did just make so much sense. And I think for both of us, when we read Normal People for the first time, like either at the beginning of this year or for Carolyn last year, neither of us had read Emma at that point, and then we both read Emma earlier this year, and so reading it the second time around and being able to recognise those characters and recognise and understand what Connell is saying about Emma just makes it even more relatable and just gives it a little bit more depth. And so it's always fun going back to books where maybe they have certain like cultural references and things that you hadn't really interacted with the first time around because they just didn't stand out to you, and then the second time around, without even intending to, you've been more familiarised with certain aspects of the book and certain bits just jump out at you more and more. So overall, that was a really fun, and it was so nice to do a Skype reading session together and chat about our thoughts. We've also got an Instagram chat going where we're all sharing our thoughts, but it was really nice to just be able to read it together and chat and just read in real time together and just enjoy the book. And then, yeah, what else is there to say right now? I think the main thing I'm noticing is obviously I'm loving it, and I think watching the TV show alongside the book and watching little bits of the episodes and then reading little bits of the book is making me see how they both convey this story so incredibly but in such different ways. One way in particular, like I said, the TV show takes a lot more time with what's going on because it's conveying things in a very different format, and in the book each of the chapters are essentially titled with like a duration. For example, one says 4 months later, August 2011, so they're all dated and you know exactly how much has like time has passed in between each section, and so it's very much a slice of life style of book where you're just getting little snippets of Connell and Marianne's relationships and lives and seeing how each previous installment has influenced the next, and basically just seeing the evolution of their relationship. And because you have it written right there and then, and you know exactly how much time has passed, and you know what's going on, and you can see a little bit more insight into their direct thoughts because they're written in front of you, the way that it's sort of set out with this little snippet style just really, really works, and I think adds to the authenticity of their relationship because it's not so linear, and you don't feel like Sally Rooney is trying to pigeonhole them into a very linear plot where a romance is following a classic trajectory. It feels a lot more authentic and realistic, whereas although the TV show deals with the exact same events, it does have a slightly more linear format where some of the gaps that the book leaves are filled in a little bit more, and it doesn't add to or take away from anything in the book, it just shows it in a different way, which makes it a lot easier to convey visually. And I just think it's so interesting to see how the book and the TV show for me convey such similar emotions and just are such impactful, like, I guess texts. I don't know if you can call a TV show text, but they both are just so impactful and incredible, but they do things very differently and yet somehow still manage to reach the same conclusion in terms of the emotion that they make you feel as a viewer or reader. So it's really fun to be reading and watching it alongside one another, which is obviously something I didn't have the first time around because I'd read the book, then watched the TV show, and so they were very separate, but reading and watching it together is definitely a different but really, really nice experience. So I've got about 100 pages left and it's about 9 p.m, so I'm definitely going to read some more now before going to sleep, and I may even finish it, but I'll probably update you in the morning now just because I hate filming when it's dark outside because it just looks rubbish. But yeah, I'm definitely going to do some more reading and I'm just enjoying it so much. Good morning guys, so it is now Monday and I just finished up with my reread of Normal People, so I've just made myself a coffee and come sit out in the garden to chat about all of my thoughts. So it's currently about 7:30ish and I ended up reading about 200 pages last night before going to bed, and then I was starting to get quite tired, so I decided to leave the final 50 pages until this morning just because I didn't want to miss out on any of the detail. And honestly, I just had such a good time rereading this book. I thought I would share with you, as I have been doing throughout the book, a few quotes that I really liked from this last 50 or so pages. So the first one kind of really explores for me how Connell and Marianne always act in response to one another, and I always see them as kind of opposites, and it's interesting to me because they are constantly changing and evolving, and yet the other person always seems to change and evolve in the exact right way to provide what the other person needs, and they're always kind of that balancing factor for one another. And so in this quote on page 212, Connell is watching Marianne and he says, he felt in awe of her naturalness, her easy way of moving through the world. It hadn't been like that in school, quite the opposite. Back then, Connell had been the one who understood how to behave, whilst Marianne had just aggravated everyone. And it's like they're constantly changing in their happiness levels, in their social statuses, in their relationships, and yet the other one always seems to just balance the other person out. And whilst Connell is in awe of Marianne, Marianne is always continually in awe of and in admiration of Connell, and I just think it's so interesting how they always seem to provide that balancing factor for the other one. The book also explores depression in terms of Connell's experience with depression, and although the depression only seems to make up maybe about the last 50 pages of the book. It's only sort of prevalent in that little last section, so it's only a small factor of the story as a whole, and yet I feel like Sally Rooney's exploration of it has so much power, and you just really feel the impact of what has happened to Connell. And I think in terms of the narrative, the almost suddenness of what happens to him just really seems to hit you as a reader, because you can sort of clearly see how this character who started out as so confident and so popular and has that status slowly sort of taken away from him throughout the college experience could gradually just find themselves slipping into what then appears to be quite a serious depressive episode. And we just see him like dealing with all of these feelings and not knowing how exactly to go about it. And I think she explores the kind of like almost not like sadness that comes with depression, but rather the lack of energy or motivation to do anything, and how Connell kind of just doesn't know how to go about living life as normal. And then we also see him starting to recover from this experience, and there's a quote here which says, "Life offers up these moments of joy despite everything." And I think like we see that throughout this book because it deals with some quite dark topics. It starts off with an exploration of bullying. We also have some abusive relationships, both in terms of romantic relationships and family relationships, and the long-lasting effects of these traumas. And then of course we have clinical depression, and there are just a lot of dark topics explored within this book. But through Marianne and Connell's relationship with one another, although it's not a perfect relationship and not one which is without its flaws, we do see them finding these moments of joy and happiness within one another, and they sort of each provide that sense of comfort and like companionship for one another, where they both know that the other one, regardless of what is going on in other parts of their lives, will always have their back, which I think is really nice. And then the final quote I wanted to share was, in my opinion, one that just really summarised Connell and Marianne's relationship as a whole, and that was, "All these years, they've been like two little plants sharing the same plot of soil, growing around one another, contorting to make room, taking certain unlikely positions." And I just feel like that is exactly what I was trying to say before, with how they constantly balance one another out. They're growing in this same plot of soil, and they constantly have to evolve in order to make room for how the other one is growing, and they constantly have to sort of adapt to what's going on for the other person, because they, although they're not always in a relationship, they constantly are part of this duo, and they need to kind of adapt in order to make room for the other person. And that doesn't even seem to be a conscious choice really anymore. It's something that just kind of happens because they've been put in this same plot of soil, and therefore they grow together, which I just think is so beautiful and so indicative of their relationship as a whole throughout this book. Honestly, just think this book is incredible. I absolutely love it, and the reason I love it is because, yes, you could describe this book as a romance. Romance is kind of one of the prevalent factors of this. We're seeing this constant evolution of a relationship between two characters, but in every other sense, aside from the fact that it's a book which focuses on a romance between two people, this is not a romance whatsoever. In my opinion, this is probably one of the most realistic insights into a relationship that I've ever seen in a fiction book. Not in the sense that every relationship follows the trajectory of Marianne's and Connell's, but in actual fact in the way that it explores that not every relationship follows the same trajectory. I feel like in many other romances, you just have this perfect arc of a relationship and everything works out exactly as you would expect. This book ends in a very open way, and it kind of just points you in the direction of knowing that as a reader that relationships don't just end when the book ends. These are like crafted as though they're real characters with a real life and real relationships, and we see how there's a sense of openness in this book because they're not following life on a particular literary arc. And I feel like although normal romances can be really fun to read and really nice, there's something poignant and so much more impactful about this book because of the way that it kind of just hits you in so many ways, because the relationship doesn't follow a clear trajectory. There are so many ups and downs and so many moments where you as a reader feel frustration because Connell and Marianne misunderstand each other and they could be happy but they just kind of let other emotions get in the way. But that is what happens in real life. Things don't always happen as you would want them to in fiction, and things can be misunderstood, people can make wrong decisions, and it's just so interesting that although all of these ups and downs are explored in such great depth, we also see this constant companionship and a sense of connection between these two characters that never wavers. And so I absolutely love it. I think it was incredible. I'm really looking forward to continuing on with my rewatch of the series as well, because I know I love that as well. I do think that the writing style that Sally Rooney has in this book is very frank and to the point. She really doesn't shy away from things. She doesn't have an overly flowery or lyrical sense of her writing style. It's just very to the point, very frank, very raw, and just very real. And I feel like because of that, the book can often have a sense of detachment where you don't really feel like you are part of the inner circle of Marianne and Connell. You're kind of an observer watching this evolution of their relationship, whereas I do feel like in the TV show there is a little bit more of a sense of emotion attached to the characters, at least for me anyway, and I definitely found myself feeling more emotional watching the TV show, but I also just feel like I love the way that the book explores them, and obviously this was a 5-star read. So like I said, it is Monday morning. I finished Normal People and I'm now going to get started on Conversations with Friends. I don't fully know if I'm going to be able to finish this one today. I've got obviously until 2:30 this afternoon, but it is the 8th of June, which is my mum's birthday, and so I've got to do some birthday baking and we're having brunch and stuff like that, and so I don't know if I'm exactly going to have time to finish this one today, but we will see, and I'll of course enjoy it, I'm sure, because it's such an incredible book. So it's about 10:30 and I'm 100 pages into Conversations with Friends, and if nothing else, this little reread of this book and Normal People is just confirming that Sally Rooney is definitely my favourite author ever, I think. I just love her writing style so much, and I genuinely believe that she could write about anything or any character and I would just absolutely love it. This book is in a lot of ways quite similar to Normal People if you're not familiar with it. We're focusing on our main character Frances, who is a third-year student at Trinity College in Dublin, so quite similar to Marianne and Connell. She's also very similar to Marianne in a lot of ways, in the sense that she's quite a cold and outwardly not very emotional person. She's very intellectual and a lot of people think that she thinks that she's superior to them, although in actual fact she's probably not got the best self-esteem and doesn't actually have the level of confidence that her outward personality would lead you to believe. And we're following Frances as well as her ex-girlfriend and still best friend Bobby, as they are introduced to this couple, Melissa and Nick. Melissa is a writer and she wants to do a piece on Frances and Bobby because she saw them performing spoken word poetry together, and as they get introduced into this world, Bobby becomes quite interested in Melissa, and Frances and Nick, Melissa's husband, sort of spark this interest in one another, and so from there we have this very complex web of all of these intertwining relationships, and there's a lot of secrecy and miscommunication, and it's just a very intense but super interesting. I do think comparing this one to Normal People, I can see why potentially I thought that I liked this one more than Normal People, because like I mentioned earlier, I think that the writing style with Normal People is very sort of to the point and almost calculated and cold, and it's more of you feel like an observer watching Marianne and Connell's life experiences unfold, but you don't really feel like you're in them as such, whereas in this one we're actually getting it directly from Frances's point of view. And so I feel like although Frances as a character is quite cold and probably a little bit colder than Marianne and Connell both are, I feel like you just feel like you're getting more emotionally attached to what's going on because you're actually seeing it through her eyes, and you just feel slightly more directly intertwined with her experiences. But either way, I'm absolutely loving it. I'm 100 pages in, like I said. This book is slightly longer than Normal People. It's about 300 pages long, But as I mentioned earlier, I'm about to go and make some brunch stuff for my mum. I'm making some vegan almond croissants, some cinnamon rolls, and also some scones. So I'm going to go and do that now and have a brunch, which means I don't know if I'll be doing any reading for a little while, but I am definitely going to finish this book today. I don't know if I'll finish it before 2:30, so it might go slightly over 24 hours, but either way, I'm very excited to carry on with this one because it's just such an intriguing story. Okay, so it's now about 4:30, so I'm definitely out of the window of my official 24-hour readathon, but I did read normal people within that time, which was of course the goal, and for now I'm just calling this an extended Sally Rooney 24-hour readathon because I'm still reading Conversations with Friends, and I'm currently about 200 pages in, so I've got about 100 pages left to go. I'm kind of just excusing it as well because I did have to take about 4 hours earlier to make and then eat brunch, which was obviously a good chunk of time in which I couldn't do any reading where I normally would have spent that time reading in a 24-hour readathon, so I don't really mind extending this one, and just in general I'm really enjoying this reread, but I'm so struggling to decide which of Sally Rooney's 2 books I like the best because I just think they're both so incredible. However, I do think with this one, you definitely, as I mentioned earlier, do feel a little bit more like immersed in the story, if that makes sense. And I think that really comes down to the fact that A, you're getting the story directly just through Frances's perspective. So immediately you feel more attached to her as a protagonist because you're not switching around between 2 different perspectives, and you're also not getting it as kind of like a removed observer. You are kind of more thrown into the story. And then I also think that because this book follows a much more linear plot rather than like in normal people jumping into various elements of Marianne and Connell's story and jumping between various time periods. Within this one you're following like a specific period of Frances's life, and so you're following the story a lot more closely, and therefore you kind of are noticing all of the small details and nuances about everything that's going on a little bit more, just because you really like are kind of immersed in what's happening. And I'm not saying one style is better than the other because each really work for the story that they're telling, but I do think in this one it just allows you to become slightly more emotionally invested in what's going on just because you really are there in the story. And overall, I also think this one is really interesting in the ways that it explores complex relationships. Sally Rooney obviously deals with complex relationships in both of her books, and both of them do it so well. But in this one, it's super interesting because rather than just following the complexities and ups and downs of one romantic relationship like we have between Marianne and Connell, in this one you have a much more complex web of relationships and a network of connections which all kind of overlap but are very different in each of their individual relationships. So of course we have Frances and Bobby primarily, who are both best friends and ex-partners, and there's still a connection between them and obviously a closeness that comes with having the history of a friendship and a previous relationship. We then also have the newness of a relationship between Frances and Nick and Melissa, who are married, and then Bobby's interest in Melissa, and then friendships which kind of cross the entirety of that quadruple people group, and they're all kind of like interacting with each other in a friendly way as well as in various romantic ways. And so we have so many different connections happening all at the same time, and I think what Sally Rooney does in this book, which makes it so interesting, is exploring whether or not any of those relationships outweigh the other ones, and whether or not mutual exclusivity is something that can really happen in this group of people. And essentially she looks at whether one romantic relationship makes another one obsolete, and kind of explores the concept of polyamory versus monogamy in a really interesting way, because it's not something that the characters are... That was a loud train. Oh my god. Well, that was a loud train. Well, yeah, so polygamy in this book is something which isn't explored necessarily in terms of characters outwardly seeking polygamous relationships. It's something that they more stumble upon and then are forced to confront because of how it enters into their own lives, and that just makes this book so interesting. I also think that the way that it kind of explores Frances and Bobby's friendship as being kind of one of the most important long-lasting relationships in both of their lives is really, really impactful, and something that is only just starting to be explored because Frances is behaving in ways that kind of undermine her friendship with Bobby. And although she's quite an aloof person, and both her and Bobby sort of are quite judgmental and cynical and sort of don't really have like a super like upfront and chatty relationship, they both talk in very intellectual ways that kind of makes it very easy for them to misunderstand one another. There are times when Bobby starts to get frustrated with Frances because she just can't understand how Frances can sort of value another relationship over their friendship. So it's really interesting to see that sort of unfolding, and I'm just loving it so much. So I'm about to go grab some dinner and then I'll carry on reading this one, but yeah, I'm absolutely loving it. Well, like the rest of the day seems to have done, the evening just flew by. It's now almost 9 p.m. and I just finished up reading Conversations with Friends. I still, at this point, just cannot decide which of the two books that I liked better because they're both just so incredible. They're both very similar in a lot of ways. Like I've already mentioned, I do believe that as characters, Marianne and Frances are both very similar. They both definitely struggle with their self-esteem and turn to relationships both as a way to make themselves feel better, as well as a way to kind of punish themselves and to confirm in their own minds the low self-esteem that they've granted themselves, if that makes sense. So they often view themselves badly and put themselves as the lower and more submissive person in their relationship in order to kind of solidify the lack of self-worth that they believe that they have. And so they're very similar characters in that sense. However, I feel like in Frances we see a little bit more of a conclusion and a little bit more progression away from that mindset, whereas in Normal People for Marianne and Connell, like I've already said, we have a much more open-ended narrative which doesn't really conclude a lot, which does really work in that context. Whereas I feel like for Frances, we do see her kind of confronting these issues a little bit more, and because this book is one which deals with the somewhat controversial topic of polygamous relationships and how they may or may not work, I feel like it's a book which in general deals with confronting a lot of boundaries and stripping away sort of preconceived ideas and trying to get to the bottom of what people want rather than what society wants. And so we see in this context Frances having to sort of come to terms with and confront her own personal issues in order to figure out what she wants from her relationships. And I feel like earlier I was trying to explore what this relationship does in terms of the way that it explores polygamous relationships, but there was a quote quite near the end of the book which I just think did it so much better than I could have ever done, which was, "When there were 4 of us, I always thought in terms of couples anyway, which threatened me, since all the possible couples that didn't involve me seemed so much more interesting than the ones that did. But now I see that nothing consists of 2 people or even 3. My relationship with you is also produced by your relationship with Melissa and with Nick and with your childhood self, etc. Isn't it possible that we could develop an alternative model of loving each other?" And I just feel like that really summarises what this book tries to do. It explores this complex web of relationships and kind of just goes into the fact that none of these relationships can really be seen as separate entities, when in actual fact they're also intertwined, that they can't really be separated from one another. They each have separate qualities, but none of those qualities can really be sort of removed from the fact that what's going on in each of the different relationships has an impact on all of the other ones. And I just feel like it was a really interesting way to explore the various ways in which people can interact with one another on so many different levels, and how they can love each other in various ways, and how one form of love doesn't necessarily make another one obsolete, and how they can be mutually exclusive, but that in order to make that work, all different parties that are involved have to be kind of aware and understanding of what the situation is, which is I think where a lot of the complexities arose from, because there were so many secrets and boundaries that people ended up with a lot of miscommunications. Another thing actually in which I found Marianne and Francis to be very similar characters, which I kind of just remembered, was the way in which they continually self-sabotage. They're both very, very intelligent characters, and are characters, like I've already mentioned, I believe, that are seen as quite aloof and seen by people as viewing themselves as quite superior just because of their intelligence, despite the fact that in terms of their actual self-esteem, they both actually don't really like themselves that much. And because of this sense of superiority that comes across to other people, they often experience a sense of people misunderstanding them, and because of this they end up with so many issues in their relationships, and things don't go the way that they would hope, just because they really struggle to convey themselves and to sort of make themselves vulnerable by really expressing emotion, and instead they hide behind a guise of sort of intellect in order to sort of place a barrier between themselves and the rest of the world. And that is obviously a continual form of self-sabotage because they stop themselves from really becoming happy. And in this book, I really do feel like we see Frances coming to terms with that part of her characteristic and starting to become more vulnerable, and we see that having a much more positive impact on her relationships. But overall, really, really loved it. Fully cannot decide which of the two I like better because they're both just so incredible, and I think I'm quite happy to say that both of these books are up there, not only with my favourite books of 2020 so far, but just with my favourite books ever. I think Sally Rooney is just incredible. She's such a talented author, and for me, I just feel like her books just have this like an indescribable effect. The relationships which she has, the relationship that, for example, Nick and Frances have and Marianne and Connell have, where they sort of talk about how it's not the same with other people and they have this indescribable connection with one another, is, to be perfectly honest, how I feel about her books. They just have this like absolutely incredible impact on me, and it's something that I can't really put into words, but I just feel like the books stay with me and they just kind of linger in my mind for so long after I finish reading them, and I just feel continually impacted by them, and not because of any particular thing that happened in the plot or anything that's sort of really tangible, but just with the overall feeling and character that the books explore and create. It just does something to me which I just think is so incredible, and like I said, I really just cannot wait to read more of what Sally Rooney does because she's just so good. And I also feel the exact same way about the TV adaptation of Normal People. Again, that one just kind of stuck with me, and it literally just feel like it's like hanging over me like this thing that I just can't shift because it was just so impactful. And they are also making a TV adaptation of Conversations with Friends, which I fully cannot wait for because I just know it's going to be incredible. But overall, if you couldn't already tell, I have had the most incredible time rereading both of these books. Emma and Carolyn, who both joined me in reading Normal People, also really loved the book. Like I said, it was Emma's first time and she just had the most incredible time reading it, and she seemed to really enjoy the book, and Carolyn, like me, just had so much fun rereading it. And so it was just a lovely, not quite 24-hour readathon because I definitely extended it a little bit, but just a day and a bit of delving into the world of Sally Rooney's writing and absolutely loving it. So if you have read either of these books and you're also a big fan of Sally Rooney, definitely let me know your thoughts down below, and if you've managed to decide which of these two books is your favourite, definitely let me know because, like I said, I'm really struggling. They're both just so good, and if not, maybe I hope that I've inspired you to pick up one of Sally Rooney's books, or better yet, both of them, because they both are just so incredible and I just think everyone should read them. So that is of course going to bring this little Sally Rooney Sally Rooney readathon to an end. I hope you enjoyed hearing all of my thoughts. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.